Good morning to everyone. Pavlo Moroz, Deputy Minister of Justice, on state registration and notary. Today we'd like to talk about the reforms taking place in our country. This is the reform in the sphere of state registration of real estate and real estate rights, and also I'd like to talk about such thing as raidership, which is taking place now in Ukraine as well. And before talking about Ukraine, I would like to say that such raidership is not something unique for us. Raidership has always existed all over the world, even in the US, in Brazil, in Europe. This is not the unique phenomenon for our country. Secondly, when there were first raidership seizures, that was in the beginning of the 90s. As soon as Ukraine became independent, there were first raiders. But recently, in our no one was talking in our information space about raidership. Why? Because first of all, the procedure was very difficult for those people who suffered from raidership as to protection of their rights that were violated. If we take last year, there were about 3,000 raidership seizures, and 2,700 of them were successful. What could people do who suffered from raidership? The only mechanism that existed last year was the court. The person whose rights were violated could go to the court, and they had to spend a lot of time to receive the judicial ruling. The person had to go to the court, and even if they won the first instance, in any case, the raiders would submit the appeal, and they had to wait for the ruling of the Court of Appeal, and it would take minimum 6 months. And there were cases when the lawyers would delay it to 1 or 2 years. But when the reform took place, when the Ministry of Justice gave these functions in the sphere of registration, parallel to that, the unique body was set up, and that was the commission, which is considering the complaints against the actions of registrators. Any raidership seizure is impossible without involvement of the state registrator. The state registrator registers the right of ownership, and the commission has all the powers to consider claims against the actions of the state registrator. If the commission comes to the conclusion that the state registrator, when conducting this registration action, violated something, they canceled the registration actions and they renewed the right of ownership for the person who previously owned the facility. The raiders, when they planned their raidership seizure, they plan it that it will take that the complaint will be considered for 6 months, and the commission considers it within 30 calendar days, even faster. Within this short period of time, the raiders cannot complete their scheme. When the body started operating, the raiders didn't like it. They were spending a lot of resources to finalize the scheme, but here 2-3 weeks, and the commission canceled the legal registration actions. The pressure started, the pressure was exercised on the members of the Commission. There were letters sent, there were phone calls to all members of the Commission, and raiders would go to media to influence this Commission, but they failed in their efforts, and we also had to go to the public so that the whole country knows that there is such a body. We, as the Ministry of Justice, are fighting the raiders. And as soon as we started publicly talking about that, now statistically the number of raidership seizures has decreased. Why we hear a lot now that the country is that there's a wave of raidership seizures in the country. That's not the way. We are just the first ones who started publicly talking about that. Statistically, the number of raidership seizures hasn't increased. But despite that, now we have developed a certain mechanism to efficiently fight raidership. If raidership seizure takes place, the first instance you have to go with the National Police and the bodies of the Ministry of the Interior. We have prepared the draft, that's the draft memorandum with the National Police and the bodies of the Ministry of the Interior. We want to jointly set up a group which will immediately react to any raidership seizure. There will be hotlines open. If there are raidership seizures, you could call this hotline and you can talk about that. And then we, as a working group, as the representatives of the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of the Interior, and the National Police, will be using all the legal methods to stop this raidership attack. The next thing we did, we set up the working group. And we understand that some amendments to our laws are to be corrected. These amendments will not influence the rating of doing business, because the laws were passed just for this rating. Now it's easy to conduct business, it's easy to register new business, to register your property rights. But there are some small key changes that will be introduced. The first one is we are returning the title for the real estate. Any owner of the real estate can go to the state registrators and will receive the certificate on the right of ownership. In the register, the number of this certificate will be registered. Then any next action with the same object will be impossible without the real owner. Then, as to real estate, the principle of exterritoriality has been narrowed down to the region. The notary, with the notaries, the principle of exterritoriality is applied to the whole country. And the principle of exterritoriality will be acting as well. And the next change, there is the draft law in accordance to which any change of the ownership of the company, any action has to be certified by the notary. And when preparing new draft, we will take into account that draft law 4216. The next important change, we want to make more complicated opening the new section in the Register of Real Estate. There were some seizures which took place by opening a new section with the company Bunge. The registrator opened the new section and registered part of the Bunge's property as owned by new owner. And the main change, we want to strengthen enhance the criminal responsibility of both the state registrator and the applicant. As soon as the criminal responsibility is enhanced, as soon as there are first examples of imprisonment of raiders, I'm sure that tradership in our country will disappear. We also want to expand the controlling functions of the Ministry of Justice in respect to notaries so that they could be made responsible for their actions that they commit as state registrators. And all these changes that I'm talking about, they will be considered by our working group. We're now the working group includes the representatives of business associations, the representatives of NGOs, and the changes that I'm talking about. The draft will be ready by the end of August, and in autumn, I'm sure that the law will be passed by the Parliament. Now I would like to give the floor to the first Deputy Minister of Justice, Natalia Sevostyanova. She will mention some other innovations. Thank you, Pavlo. Good morning. Raidership is a very negative phenomenon which influences not just people who suffer from that, but it influences the business climate of the country, the level of investments that we want to attract to our economy. That is what the Ministry of Justice does everything to combat corruption and raidership, which has existed in the country always. But now, because of the enhanced criminological situation in the country, we see that the criminals are trying to conduct criminal actions to somebody else's property. We see positive results of the reform in the sphere of registration of business and real estate. Now, when the functions have been transferred to notaries, to local authorities, to accredited subjects, we see an active result of work of local authorities who launched their centers of providing administrative services. They consolidate different services in one place. We see it in Kiev, for example, in document service Gotovy, and in other places of Ukraine. But today the Ministry of Justice decided to talk about these different situations in this sphere of readership, and we decided to fight against it publicly. In 2012-2013, that was one of the national sport, I would say, when Yanukovych family and all members of their organized criminal group were involved in raidership all over Ukraine, and understanding by the citizens that there's no effective protection from that would not show the scale of the problem. But today, thanks to this reform, there is an effective mechanism, and that's the Commission which can cancel illegal actions. We understand that for many owners of the property of business, if it is a small business, if the person suffered from ridership, it was very difficult to return it back via courts, because that meant 1, 2, 3 instances, and it would take 2, 3 years to prove that that's your property. But the raiders would depreciate this property during that time. Now the Commission can resolve that situation in 2 or 3 weeks. We continue to analyze the situation where raiders are mostly active. We analyzed the most frequent cases and schemes that they're using, and we suggested legislative changes to remove any risks of readership. We have one more interesting proposal that we would like to mention. We understand that the parliamentary session will start in September this year, and we will be looking forward to the decisions made on these draft laws, but the owners of property want to know what's happening with their property. You remember that we opened the register last year, and you can see what's happening with your property or business, what changes were introduced into the register. But from our point of view, that's the stress. If you wake up every day and think about and check whether it's still yours. So we are offering new service, and that's SMS on any changes in the register that relate to your business or real estate. That will allow you very quickly to react if anything happens to your property. If you see that someone introduced changes to the register, you could go to the national police, to law enforcement bodies immediately to open criminal case, and you could go to the Commission of the Ministry of Justice to cancel these actions. We understand that this service is what's needed today. It's needed for both business and average citizen, and that will help understand that we do not have this huge problem with readership, but it is important that every citizen is sure that nothing happens to his real estate. We hope that the new service, that the citizens will like this new service, and in September we hope that you will start connecting to this new service. Could you explain how you can connect to this service? And the second one, I have an impression, maybe I'm wrong. Pavlo said that you are now you are now talking openly about that. Does that mean that there are some attempts to liquidate this commission? Talking about service, the service will start working in a month. In September this year, we will inform on the website of the Ministry of Justice about which application you need to submit to get connected. It will be paid, but the payment will be just minimum. Everything will be very simple. You will apply, you will pay for the service, and you will give the phone number to which you want to get the SMS information. Unfortunately, the interpreter cannot hear the further discussion. As to payment, we are looking at considering several methods. to implement it. We're considering several methods. Online service. This will be minimum money, or you can go directly to the state registrator. If that's the regional registrator, that's minimum. If it is addressed to the notary, then they would like some additional money. They will be providing additional services, so there will be some minimum cost, but depending on which registrator will connect the person to the service, it may become more expensive. Why cannot we tell you what the final price will be? It depends on several factors. We are monitoring if the person goes to the register of somebody else. No registration actions were made, but someone got to your register. That's one service. If the person wants to register something, that's different payment. Then there will be a subscription fee. You can order that for half a year, for 10 years. The price will differ. It's on payment. As to your question as to discrediting the Commission, yes. There are many, those who are unhappy, because any cancelled registration action, there is someone who's unhappy with this situation. Raiders spent a lot of time to implement their scheme, but they failed to do it. The last two attempts, that was Unica and Novus companies, they spent a lot of money, resources, but they failed to do anything. They didn't have time. What actions? What was done to the registrators with the situations that you mentioned? The two registrators. That was a unique situation. Both readership seizures were made by same registrator. That registrator, the Commission made the decision to cancel the access of this registrator to the registers forever. And we prepared all the materials on this case. And we sent the letter to the National Police so that they conduct their own investigation. And if they prove that that's the crime, and that the state registrator colluded with the raiders, then he will be made responsible. Okay, thank you.